When I was 6 years old, my mother read me this outstanding book that was published by the Disney company called, I think, Our Friend the Atom. And it really developed the whole story of how human beings, by thinking about problems, discovered atomic theory. I remember people saying, we understand the atom better than ourselves, by which they meant that we understood how to do nuclear engineering to create these horrible weapons that can obliterate everyone in an entire city, and yet we don't understand ourselves well enough to control our impulse to war. So the idea that the atomic bomb came out of the most fundamental approaches to physics, and we need to understand how to avoid war. Maybe this approach to the most fundamental aspects of social science might yield insights that will be useful. That certainly was totally a guiding intuition. In 1972, they had humanities courses, but they were not teaching game theory at Harvard. I took a beautiful course from Howard Rafa, and that changed my life. It was a course on decision analysis where he took the mathematics of decision theory and how would we assess the mathematical quantities for real people in practical decision problems. How would you quantify the probabilities and utilities that define your beliefs and your preferences, turning feelings about what you should do into numbers and formulas. Anyway, at the end of that beautiful course, he then said, well, if you put two or more decision makers together and they're interacting with each other, that's a game. And game theory is the mathematical, methods for analyzing such things. And not much has been done with game theory. I felt, as a junior at Harvard, how can life go on? How could anybody think about anything when this absolutely fundamental framework for thinking about social interactions has been inadequately understood? How do we all get along together? That's the great question of social science. Economic theory before game theory focused on trading goods. But game theory says, let's look at those transactions without talking about the commodities, just talk about the people. You have to be clear about who are the players, what does each of them want, what are each of their options, and what's their information. All of that has to be specified. So game theory has given social scientists a way of kind of going wherever the situation leads. I often say what I've done in game theory that was most important was how could people organize their transactions efficiently when they have different information and difficulty trusting each other. If we have different information but don't have any difficulty trusting each other, well, we lay our cards on the table and then work it out from there. But in fact, we can't lay our cards on the table, or I don't want to lay our cards on the table, or I could lie about some things that you can't verify. How should economists define the efficiently organized transactions among people who have different information and can't just reveal it? They can't trust each other to be honest about what they know if you have the wrong incentives. So it's not obvious what efficiency is. How do we know that this is a good way to sell? If I knew more about you, I could get more, but I don't know more about you. So the model has to say, what don't I know about you? And what do you know that I don't know? And we learned how to analyze that. We didn't know how to analyze that before. I knew how to analyze it because that was one of the things I had to think about in order to solve this gloriously general problem that nobody cares about. But my intuition from when I was, a kid in college was, if we understand a general framework, that will give us the tools to analyze applied problems that are of real interest, even though I, as a kid in college or as a professor who's never left the ivory tower, might not really understand what are the applications. Some of the applications like war and peace, I'm aware of. Some of the applications like what's going on in search engines today, obviously, I don't really understand. The design of elections, if you change the rules of how you elect people to high office, then you change the rules of the game that politicians play to get power. And if you believe in democracy, it's because you think that having a competition for power is important. And I do believe in democracy. I believe that's absolutely right. But then the rules of the competitive game are important. 2003, the United States invaded Iraq. I thought that was a terrible mistake, and I joined a little group that on 10 a.m. on Saturday mornings for several weeks in the spring of 2003 would go out and protest against the war. I was there. But the president of the United States, George W. Bush, said, we are entering Iraq to rebuild it as a sovereign democratic nation. So, okay, we were not going to conquer Iraq, unlike Russia, which is saying he wants to conquer Ukraine. No. And he did try to fulfill that promise. But I thought that's a social science question. How do you do that? And the history showed that actually U.S. policymakers did not know how to do it. That, and when we were in college, the same thing was happening in Vietnam, and we failed there. That was pretty important. As a game theorist who studied transactions between people who had different information, I've had a career seeing that information sharing is essential to the problems that the economy solves. Today, we have a global economic market which has improved human welfare for billions of people. That's happened because we have a market mechanism for communicating very effectively consumer demand from all over the world. These great economic organizations have a lot of power, but they bring the message: you can do a lot of good for people somewhere even on the other side of the world if you will produce this stuff. Well, producing that stuff often means burning fuel. It means destroying a pristine landscape, and that has a cost. So the very real material needs and desires of people are being communicated, but these are for private goods that we're willing to pay for. But it's much more difficult to communicate the fact that humans all over the world really want a stable climate, and we want to live in a world where the rich diversity of life on which we depend is maintained, is not inadvertently lost. If we have the policies that are well maintained, you and I can enjoy them without paying for them if everybody else does. And if nobody else is paying for it, why should you and I? So it's a much harder economic problem. But it is about information. We work on things that we think, A, are important to the world, to people for some reason or other, and B, we have an intuition that if we work on them really, really hard, we'll actually be able to learn something that's true, that wasn't sufficiently understood before. And that's I've had the privilege of living my life exactly like that. Good ideas are worth developing, and our society, our species, we as a people are better off when we understand things better than when we don't. And much of what we need to understand is ourselves, not just the atom.